Visit us at Eduvvo. Thank you for calling Eduvvo.
CSS added 3 powerful selectors called substring matching attribute selectors that allow us to target specific pieces of HTML attributes. Let's see how. As we learned in previous lessons, we can target the attribute values of HTML elements. With substring matching attribute selectors, we can get really specific and target pieces of those attribute values, like certain letters or words. Those pieces are called substrings. So to get us started, I've set up a simple HTML file with a paragraph, some link, and image elements we'll be targeting with these handy substring matching attribute selectors. And we can see what it's looking like in the browser as I've added a few simple styles in our style.css file just to get us started. So first up, we'll cover what is referred to as the begins with attribute selector, because it targets an element whose attribute value begins with what we specify in the selector. So it begins with a certain piece of the value string. And I'll show you what I mean. So in our HTML file, notice how 2 of the links point to external links beginning with http://, and 1 links to what would be an internal HTML page. So let's differentiate the 2 types of links by applying a different font color to the external links only. In our style.css file, we'll create our selector by first selecting the anchor element, followed by a set of square brackets. In between the square brackets, we'll specify that we're selecting the link's href attribute. We'll then follow that with the caret character and an equal sign. Next, we'll need to specify the beginning of the value we want to target, which is http://. So in our selector, the caret character is what defines the begins with selector, and it's what tells the browser to match this specific piece of code that's at the beginning of a link's href attribute. So in our rule, I will go ahead and add the color property and the value sea green. So when we save our style sheet and refresh the browser, we can see how only those links containing HTTP at the beginning of their href attributes are targeted by the browser. The other one remains the same. So it only looks for the beginning of the string. If we actually remove the / in our selector and keep it as http://, we can see how it still works because the href value still begins with http://. So let's go over another useful example of the begins with selector. So back in our HTML file, what if we also wanted to create a unique style for our email link here at the bottom? Well, we already know that its href attribute begins with mail to : so in our CSS, we can go ahead and create a new rule and this time use the mail to value. So a square brackets href caret equals, then inside of our quotation marks, we'll type mail to : We'll go ahead and give it a color value of white, a background color of tomato red, followed by a little bit of padding. And finally, we'll go ahead and remove the text decoration by giving it the value none. So I'll save the style sheet and go back into the browser. When we refresh it, we can see how the email link at the bottom has the color, padding, and background styles applied. So like our begins with selector, there's also a selector that's referred to as the ends with selector because it selects an element whose attribute value ends with a certain value or substring. So back in our HTML file, in our second set of links, Notice how one of the links points us to a PDF file and the one below to a Word document file. So using the ends with selector, let's add an icon in front of each of these links based on their .pdf and .doc file extensions. In our style.css file, we'll again create our selector by first selecting the anchor element, then the element's href attribute. This time we'll use the $sign to target href values ending with .pdf. So this time the $sign is what defines the ends with selector, because it tells the browser to match a substring that's at the end of a link's href attribute value. So next, we'll add the icons as background images. In the images directory, we can see how there is an image named doc.png and another named pdf.png. So in our ends with rule, I'll go ahead and add the first icon to the PNG link. So I'll give it the background property and the URL function. Now, we cover background properties in detail in an upcoming lesson. So for now, just know that this background property will add the pdf.png image as a background image that does not repeat and is 2 pixels from the top. I'll also go ahead and add a little bit of padding to the left side to make room for our icon. Next, we'll do the same for the next link ending with the .doc extension. So I'll simply copy and paste this rule below, and I'll change PDF to doc and pdf.png to doc.png. Okay, so we'll save our style sheet and take a look at it in the browser. When we refresh, we see the file type icons have been added in front of their respective links because the browser matched those href values ending with .pdf and .doc. Pretty cool. So the last substring matching attribute selector we'll cover is referred to as the contains selector because it targets an element whose attribute value contains that substring we define anywhere in the value. Again, I'll show you what I mean. So in our set of images, you'll notice that each image contains the word thumbnail in the source attribute. So we can actually use the word thumbnail in our selector. The word thumbnail is the piece of the source value we want to target. So let's take a look at how it works. Back in our style.css file, we'll create a new rule by first selecting the image element. Then in the square brackets, we'll target the source attribute, and we'll use the asterisk character followed by an equal sign to specify that we're selecting any image whose source attribute contains the word thumbnail. But let's go ahead and use the word thumb just so we can see how specific we can actually get with this selector. So inside the curly braces, I will give it a border property and the value 5 pixels solid. Now the asterisk is what defines this contains selector because it tells the browser to match a value string that contains thumb anywhere in the value. It doesn't matter if there are spaces before or after the substring. The browser will still match it. So when we save the style sheet and back in the browser, when we refresh, notice how the 3 images with thumb in the source attribute have the border styles applied. Now, if we remove thumb in our substring and instead use the word sky, now the image with the word sky in the source attribute takes on the border styles. which was the very top one here. So as we just learned, substring matching attribute selectors can make our CSS selectors more powerful because we're able to target any part of an attribute, and we're not only limited to the full value. They also have strong browser support, including IE7,